The universe, in all its infinite wisdom and cosmic sense of humor, had decided that Kepler Station would be humanity's most miserable assignment. Built on Valdris, an ice moon that made Antarctica look like a tropical vacation, the station squatted against howling winds that could strip paint from hull plating. Before we begin, YouTube shows me that 93% of you haven't subscribed yet. Subscribing is free, it really supports our community, and I'd love for you to be part of it. Also, drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. And if you were unlucky enough to draw security patrol duty, well, congratulations. You just won the galactic lottery of suffering. Lieutenant Beth trudged through another delightful evening of what the brass cheerfully called perimeter reconnaissance. She called it freezing her ass off for science. The wind screamed across the crystalline wasteland, carrying ice particles that hit her visor like tiny bullets of pure spite. Her breath fogged the inside of her helmet, and somewhere deep in her boots, she was pretty sure her toes had given up and gone home. "Beautiful night for a stroll," she muttered into her comm, knowing full well that nobody was listening. Command had better things to do than monitor the complaints of one cranky security officer wandering around a moon that the universe had clearly forgotten about. Kepler Station's exterior lights cast harsh shadows across the alien landscape, creating a maze of darkness and brilliant white that played tricks on the eyes. The research facility wasn't much to look at. A collection of prefabricated modules connected by enclosed walkways, all designed with the aesthetic sensibility of a particularly boring shipping container. But it was home, and more importantly, it was warm. Beth's patrol route took her past the waste disposal unit, a cheerful little building that processed the station's garbage with mechanical efficiency. Tonight, something caught her eye near the disposal chute. A dark bundle, maybe the size of a small backpack, huddled against the base of the unit where it offered minimal protection from the wind. "Probably just trash," she said aloud, her voice carrying that particular tone of someone trying to convince themselves of something they already knew wasn't true. Some idiot probably dropped their gear bag. But trash didn't usually curl up into a ball, and it definitely didn't shiver. Beth approached cautiously, her hand instinctively moving to the plasma cutter on her belt. Valdris was supposed to be uninhabited except for the research team, but supposed to be and actually is were two very different things in the grand adventure of space exploration. The bundle was covered in what looked like fur, thick, silvery white fur that seemed to shimmer even in the harsh, artificial light. "Well, hell," she breathed, kneeling down for a closer look. It was definitely alive. Barely, but alive. The creature was roughly the size of a house cat, though its proportions were all wrong for anything from Earth. The limbs were slightly too long, the head slightly too large, and along its sides ran patches of what looked like bioluminescent markings, currently dim, like dying stars. It was breathing, but just barely, each exhale creating tiny puffs of vapor that the wind immediately stole away. Beth had seen pictures of Valdris's native fauna in the mission briefings. The planet, well, moon, was supposed to support some form of life, though most of it was microscopic or lived deep underground, where the geothermal vents provided warmth. The bigger creatures were rare and supposedly stayed far away from human settlements. Apparently, nobody had told this little guy about the rules. "What the hell are you doing out here, buddy?" she whispered, pulling off one glove to gently touch the creature's side. It was ice cold, and she could feel its ribs through the fur. "And where's your family?" The creature's eyes fluttered open, large, dark eyes that held an intelligence that made Beth's breath catch. This wasn't just some alien equivalent of a lost dog. Those eyes were aware, frightened, and heartbreakingly young. Protocol was clear. Any contact with native life forms was to be reported immediately. The creature should be photographed, catalogued, and observed from a distance. Under no circumstances should personnel attempt direct contact without proper authorization and a full xenobiological team standing by. Protocol could kiss her frozen ass. Beth looked around the empty landscape, as if expecting Commander Bruce to materialize out of the ice and start reciting regulations. The wind howled its disapproval, and somewhere in the distance, the station's generators hummed their mechanical lullaby. She was alone, the creature was dying, and Protocol wasn't going to help either of them. "This is probably the stupidest thing I've ever done," she told the cub, because that's clearly what it was. A baby of whatever species called this frozen hellscape home. "But I'm pretty sure letting you freeze to death isn't going to look good on my performance review either." She shrugged out of her thermal outer jacket, immediately regretting the decision as the cold bit through her uniform like a living thing with teeth. Working quickly, she wrapped the cub in the jacket, surprised by how light it was. The creature made a soft sound, not quite a whimper, not quite a purr, but something that spoke of gratitude and desperate hope. "Yeah, well, don't thank me yet," Beth muttered, tucking the bundle against her chest where her body heat could do the most good. "I haven't figured out how to explain you to my commanding officer." The walk back to the station's main airlock felt like the longest journey of her life. Every step was a gamble. Would someone be monitoring the security feeds? Would her sudden change in patrol route trigger some automated alert? Would the cub survive long enough for her heroic stupidity to matter? The airlock cycled with its usual mechanical precision, and Beth found herself holding her breath, partly from nerves, partly because she was pretty sure the cub had stopped breathing entirely. But as the inner door slid open, and blessed warmth washed over them, the creature stirred slightly in her arms. "Come on, little guy," she whispered, hurrying through the station's corridors. "Stay with me." Her quarters were blessedly empty, and thankfully located in a section of the station where foot traffic was minimal. Beth sealed the door behind her and immediately cranked up the heat, not caring about the energy consumption reports she'd have to explain later. She had bigger problems. The cub was still alive, but barely. Its breathing was shallow and irregular, and those beautiful dark eyes remained closed. Beth cleared her small dining table and gently unwrapped her new roommate, getting her first good look at what she'd just committed herself to hiding. The creature was definitely young. Everything about it screamed "baby" in that universal language that transcended species. Its fur was softer than anything she'd ever touched, and now that it was warming up, the bioluminescent patches along its sides were beginning to glow with a soft blue light. It had 4 limbs that ended in what looked like a cross between paws and hands, each digit tipped with retractable claws that were currently extended in what she hoped was a reflexive response to stress rather than a threat display. "Okay," Beth said, settling into the chair beside the table. "Now what?" The universe, as usual, had no helpful suggestions. She started with the basics, warming the cub up gradually, checking for obvious injuries, trying to figure out if it needed food or water or medical attention that she was completely unqualified to provide. The creature's breathing gradually strengthened, and after what felt like hours, those intelligent dark eyes opened again. This time, they focused on her. The cub made that soft sound again, definitely not threatening, definitely communicative. It struggled to lift its head, looking around Beth's quarters with obvious confusion. When its gaze returned to her, she could have sworn she saw gratitude there. "Yeah, well, don't get too comfortable," she told it, though her voice lacked any real conviction. "This is temporary. just until we figure out what to do with you." The cub's response was to curl up into a tighter ball and close its eyes, apparently deciding that the warm human was trustworthy enough to sleep near. Beth leaned back in her chair and contemplated the spectacular mess she'd just created. She was harboring an unknown alien life form in direct violation of about 15 different regulations. If Commander Bruce found out, she'd be on the next transport back to Earth with a dishonorable discharge and probably a few criminal charges to keep her company. On the other hand, the alternative had been letting an obviously intelligent creature freeze to death outside her door. "Some choice," she muttered. The cub's breathing had settled into a steady rhythm, and the bioluminescent patches were glowing brighter now, pulsing gently like a slow heartbeat. It was actually kind of beautiful, in an utterly alien way that made Beth's chest tight with an emotion she couldn't quite name. Outside her window, Valdris continued its eternal dance of ice and wind, indifferent to the small drama playing out in her quarters. Somewhere in the station, her fellow crew members were going about their normal routines, blissfully unaware that their security officer had just made first contact with what might be an entirely new form of intelligent life. "Tomorrow's going to be interesting," Beth said softly, watching the gentle rise and fall of the cub's breathing. The cub made a small sound in its sleep, almost like agreement. Morning on Kepler Station arrived with all the subtlety of a plasma cannon blast. The artificial lighting cycled from dim night mode to full brightness, and somewhere in the depths of the facility, the shift change alarm began its cheerful electronic assault on everyone's eardrums. Beth woke up in her chair with a crick in her neck, and the immediate panic-inducing realization that she was harboring an alien fugitive. The cub was still there, still alive, and currently examining her coffee maker with the kind of intense curiosity that suggested it might be plotting either an escape or a caffeine heist. "Good morning to you, too," Beth muttered, stretching muscles that had definitely not been designed for sleeping in chairs. "I don't suppose you've figured out how to explain yourself to my commanding officer." The cub turned those large, dark eyes toward her and made a series of soft, chirping sounds that could have been anything from "good morning" to "your furniture tastes terrible." In the light of day, Beth could see details she'd missed the night before. The creature's fur wasn't uniformly silver. There were subtle patterns woven through it, almost like natural camouflage designed for ice and shadow. Its ears were larger than they'd appeared, and they swiveled independently to track sounds throughout the room. Most unsettling of all, the cub was clearly studying her with the same intensity she was studying it. "You're not just some lost pet, are you?" Beth asked, though she already knew the answer. Everything about the creature's behavior screamed intelligence. The way it had examined her quarters, tested the temperature of the air with delicate sniffs, positioned itself near the heat vent while maintaining a clear line of sight to the door. These weren't the actions of a simple animal. The cub responded with what sounded distinctly like agreement. Beth's door chime chose that moment to announce a visitor, sending both her and the cub into immediate panic mode. The creature's bioluminescent patches flared bright blue, and it scrambled behind the coffee maker with surprising speed. Beth grabbed a blanket and threw it over the small appliance, creating what was probably the galaxy's most suspicious coffee maker cozy. "Just a minute," she called, trying to sound like someone who definitely wasn't hiding an alien life form in her kitchen. The door chimed again, followed by a voice that made Beth's blood pressure spike into the stratosphere. "Beth, it's Bruce. Open up." Commander Bruce was many things: a competent leader, a decent tactical officer, and absolutely, without question, the most by-the-book human being ever to set foot on an alien moon. If regulations said the sky was green, Bruce would argue that point until his dying breath, even while staring at a demonstrably blue atmosphere. "Coming!" Beth called, shooting a desperate look toward the coffee maker. The blanket wasn't moving, which she chose to interpret as the cub being smart enough to stay hidden rather than having died of shock. She opened the door to find Bruce standing in the corridor with that particular expression that suggested someone was about to have a very bad day. His uniform was, as always, perfectly pressed, despite the fact that they were living on a frozen rock where the laundry facilities consisted of one overworked recycling unit. "Morning, Commander," Beth said, blocking the doorway with what she hoped looked like casual confidence rather than desperate obstruction. "What can I do for you?" "Your patrol report from last night," Bruce said, consulting his ever-present tablet. "You logged an anomaly near the waste disposal unit, but didn't provide details." Beth's brain scrambled for an explanation that wouldn't involve the phrase, "I found an intelligent alien baby and decided to adopt it." "Just some debris," she said. "Probably blew in from the processing plant." "I cleared it." Bruce's eyes narrowed slightly. "What kind of debris?" "The kind that... debris... around," Beth replied brilliantly. "You know, space debris. Very debrisy. If there was an award for worst cover story in the history of interstellar security, Beth was pretty sure she'd just claimed the Lifetime Achievement Trophy. "Mind if I come in?" Bruce asked, though his tone suggested this wasn't really a question. "I'd like to review your sector logs." "Actually, now's not a great time," Beth said, which was probably true in the same way that saying the surface of the sun was a bit warm. "I was just about to grab some breakfast." "This will only take a minute." Bruce stepped forward, and Beth realized she had a choice: let him in and hope the cub stayed hidden, or physically bar the door and confirm his suspicions that something was very wrong. Neither option seemed likely to end well. She stepped aside. Bruce entered her quarters with the methodical precision of someone conducting an inspection. His gaze swept over the room, cataloging everything with military efficiency. Beth held her breath as his attention lingered on the suspiciously blanket-covered coffee maker. "New decor?" he asked. "The unit's been making weird noises," Beth lied smoothly. "I thought maybe if I couldn't hear it, I could pretend it was working properly." Bruce made a noncommittal sound and continued his survey. He was about to say something else when a soft thump came from the kitchen area. Both humans froze. "What was that?" Bruce asked. "What was what?" Beth replied, her voice climbing into registers typically reserved for dental procedures. Another thump. Softer this time, but definitely not imaginary. Bruce's hand moved instinctively toward his sidearm. "Beth, is there someone else in here?" "No, definitely not. Just me and my exercise equipment. I was doing some morning stretches before you arrived. You know how important fitness is for security personnel." To demonstrate her commitment to physical wellness, Beth dropped to the floor and began doing what she hoped looked like stretches rather than the desperate flailing of someone whose life was falling apart in real time. Bruce watched this display with the expression of a man witnessing either a mental breakdown or the worst attempt at deception in military history. "Beth," he said carefully, "are you feeling all right?" "Never better," Beth gasped from somewhere near the floor. "Just really committed to maintaining peak physical condition in this challenging environment." The blanket moved. Bruce's attention snapped to the coffee maker like a targeting system locking onto a threat. "What's under the blanket?" "Coffee maker," Beth said, which was technically true. "Why is it moving?" "It's broken?" Bruce approached the kitchen area with the caution of someone expecting an ambush. Beth scrambled to her feet, her mind racing through increasingly desperate scenarios. She could claim the coffee maker was malfunctioning. She could fake a medical emergency. She could— The door chimed again. "Saved by the bell," Beth muttered, then realized she'd said it out loud. "Don't move," Bruce ordered, his hand now definitely on his weapon. "Answer the door." Beth opened it to find Dr. Lillian standing in the corridor, holding a medical scanner and wearing the kind of smile that usually preceded either very good news or very bad news. "Good morning," Lillian said cheerfully. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything important." Dr. Lillian was the kind of person who made eccentric scientist look like a legitimate career path. Her hair defied at least 3 laws of physics on a daily basis. Her lab coat was permanently stained with substances that probably shouldn't exist, and she had the unsettling habit of finding everything absolutely fascinating, including things that normal people would consider terrifying. "Actually, this is perfect timing," Beth said, grabbing onto this unexpected lifeline. "The commander and I were just discussing some anomalies." "Anomalies?" Lillian's eyes lit up like someone had just offered her the keys to the universe. "How wonderful! What kind of anomalies?" Bruce gestured toward the coffee maker. "There's something under that blanket that appears to be alive." "Even better." Lillian practically bounced on her toes. "May I?" Before anyone could stop she'd crossed the room and whisked away the blanket with the flourish of a magician revealing the grand finale. The cub sat perched on the coffee maker, looking for all the world like it owned the place. Its bioluminescent patches pulsed gently, and its large eyes tracked each human with obvious intelligence. When it saw Lillian, it made a soft, trilling sound that somehow managed to convey both greeting and mild curiosity. Bruce's hand completed its journey to his sidearm. "Nobody move," he said quietly. "Oh, how magnificent," Lillian breathed, apparently unaware that they were potentially dealing with their first hostile alien contact. "Look at those bioluminescent organs, and the bone structure is absolutely fascinating." The cub tilted its head at Lillian's voice, then made what could only be described as a pleased chirping sound. "It likes you," Beth said weakly. "Of course it does," Lillian replied, as if this was the most natural thing in the world. "Most intelligent species respond positively to enthusiastic scientific interest." "Intelligent species?" Bruce's voice had taken on that particular tone that suggested someone was about to be court-martialed. "Oh, yes, definitely intelligent," Lillian said, pulling out her scanner and taking readings that made the device beep and chirp like a very confused bird. "Look at those neural patterns. And the way it's positioning itself, maintaining visual contact with all potential threats while staying near the heat source. That's not instinct, that's strategy." The cub seemed to realize it was the center of attention. It sat up straighter, made a series of complex clicking and whistling sounds, then looked directly at Bruce and made what was unmistakably a polite bow. Bruce stared. Then he looked at Beth, then back at the cub. "Lieutenant," he said slowly, "would you care to explain how an intelligent alien life form ended up in your coffee maker?" Beth opened her mouth, closed it, then opened it again. In her peripheral vision, she could see the cub watching this exchange with what looked like amusement. "Well," she said finally, "it's a funny story." The cub made a sound that was definitely laughter. The universe had a twisted sense of humor, and right now it was laughing its cosmic ass off at Beth's expense. She stood in her quarters, facing her commanding officer, who looked like he was deciding between a court-martial and a firing squad, while an alien cub sat on her coffee maker, making what were definitely amused, chittering sounds. A funny story, Bruce repeated slowly, his voice carrying all the warmth of a black hole's event horizon. You found an intelligent alien life form and decided to, what? Adopt it? Technically, I rescued it, Beth said, which was probably not the defense that was going to save her career. It was freezing to death. And you didn't think to report this immediately because, Beth said, grasping for any explanation that wouldn't make her sound completely insane. I was waiting for a better time. The cub chose that moment to hop down from the coffee maker and approach Bruce with obvious curiosity. It stopped just out of arm's reach and made a series of complex vocalizations that sounded distinctly like language. Fascinating, Dr. Lillian murmured, her scanner painting the air with colorful holographic displays. The neural activity is off the charts. And those vocalizations, they're structured, grammatical. This isn't just communication. It's sophisticated language. Bruce stared down at the cub, which looked back up at him with those large, intelligent eyes. When it became clear that the human wasn't going to respond, the cub sat back on its haunches and began what could only be described as a lecture. It pointed at itself, made a series of sounds, then pointed at Beth and made different sounds. It gestured toward the door, the window, and finally at Bruce himself, accompanying each gesture with distinct vocalizations. It's trying to explain the situation, Lillian said, her voice filled with scientific wonder. Look at the way it's structuring the information, temporal sequence, causal relationships, even emotional context indicators. How can you possibly know that? Bruce demanded. Pattern recognition, Lillian replied absently, most of her attention focused on her readings. Plus, it's fairly obvious. The little one is telling you that it was outside, Beth brought it inside, and now it's trying to figure out what you're going to do about it. The cub finished its explanation and looked expectantly at Bruce, apparently waiting for a response. This is insane, Bruce muttered. We have protocols for a reason. Protocols written by people who never expected to find intelligent life that looked like a cross between a house cat and a disco ball, Beth pointed out. The cub's bioluminescent patches flared brighter at the word disco, and it made a sound that was unmistakably indignant. I think it objects to the disco ball comparison, Lillian observed. Of course it does, Beth sighed. Even alien babies have dignity. Bruce looked like he was developing a migraine. Let me see if I understand this correctly. You found what appears to be a juvenile member of an unknown intelligent species, brought it into the station without authorization, and now it's… what? Learning English? I don't think it's learning English so much as it already understands it, Lillian said, studying her scanner readings. The neural patterns suggest advanced linguistic processing. It's been listening to us speak and mapping our language structure in real time. To demonstrate this point, the cub looked directly at Bruce and said, in a voice like wind chimes in a gentle breeze, "Help?" The silence that followed could have been cut with a molecular knife. Did it just… Bruce began. Speak English? Yes. Lillian was practically vibrating with excitement. First word acquisition in real time. This is unprecedented. The cub, apparently pleased with the reaction, tried again. Help, Beth? The pronunciation was careful, deliberate, but unmistakably clear. Oh, now you're talking, Beth said, trying not to let her voice betray how terrified she was of what came next. Perfect timing, kid. Bruce was staring at the cub with the expression of a man whose entire worldview had just been reorganized without his permission. This changes everything. Yes, it does, came a new voice from the doorway. Everyone turned to see Commander Bruce's worst nightmare. Administrator Walsh, from Colonial Command, flanked by two security officers and looking like someone who had just discovered that her morning coffee had been replaced with liquid bureaucracy. "Administrator," Bruce said, snapping to attention, "I wasn't expecting—" "Clearly," Walsh interrupted, her gaze fixed on the cub, which had immediately moved to position itself behind Beth's legs. "I received some very interesting reports about unusual energy readings from this section of the station." Lillian held up her scanner guiltily. "That might have been my fault." "Doctor, your scientific enthusiasm is noted," Walsh said dryly. "However, what I'm seeing here appears to be a violation of approximately 15 different first contact protocols." The cub poked its head around Beth's legs and studied the new arrivals with obvious wariness. When Walsh made a sudden gesture toward her tablet, the little creature's patches flared bright white, and it made a sound that definitely qualified as a warning. "Protective behavior," Lillian observed. "It's bonded with Beth." "Wonderful," Walsh said. "Lieutenant, you do realize that harboring an alien life form without authorization is grounds for immediate reassignment to the least hospitable posting in known space?" "I was saving its life," Beth said, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. "It was freezing to death." "Noble," Walsh acknowledged. "Stupid, but noble. The question now is what we do about it." The cub stepped out from behind Beth and approached Walsh with the careful confidence of someone about to engage in interstellar diplomacy. It stopped a respectful distance away, performed what was unmistakably a formal bow, and spoke in its musical voice. "Greetings, Leader Human." The security officers' hands moved toward their weapons. "Stand down," Walsh ordered, though her own hand was nowhere near relaxed. "Doctor, your assessment?" "Highly intelligent, clearly peaceful, and demonstrating remarkable linguistic adaptation," Lillian said rapidly. "No signs of hostility, advanced problem-solving capabilities, and what appears to be an understanding of social hierarchies." "It called me Leader Human," Walsh noted. "Accurate assessment of command structure based on behavioral cues," Lillian confirmed. "This species has a sophisticated understanding of social dynamics." The station's communication system chose that moment to interrupt with an urgent priority signal. "Commander Bruce to communications," came the voice of Lieutenant Torres. "We're receiving a transmission from the surface. Multiple contacts approaching the station." Everyone froze. Valdris was supposed to be uninhabited, except for microscopic life and the occasional underground thermal vent ecosystem. "What kind of contacts?" Bruce demanded. "Sir, they appear to be— well, they're moving with purpose. And they're big." The cub's patches suddenly blazed with brilliant light, and it made a series of urgent vocalizations that needed no translation. It was calling for help. "Family," the cub said, looking directly at Walsh. "Family comes." "Oh, wonderful," Beth muttered. "The parents are home." Through the window, they could see lights moving across the ice field. Not the chaotic dance of atmospheric phenomena, but the organized patterns of intelligence. Multiple sources, moving in coordinated formation toward the station. "How many?" Walsh asked Torres through the comm. "At least a dozen, ma'am. Maybe more. They're maintaining formation and— Commander, they're carrying what look like weapons." The cub made a distressed sound and pressed closer to Beth, its patches dimming to a worried blue. "They're not happy," Lillian observed unnecessarily. "No kidding," Beth said, kneeling down to the cub's level. "Hey, little guy. Those are your people out there?" "Family angry," the cub confirmed in its musical voice. "Think humans took young one." "Did we?" Walsh asked pointedly. Saved, young one, the cub corrected. Beth Human saved. And now your family is coming to get you back, Bruce said, his tactical mind already working through the implications. Coming to see if humans are enemy, the cub said solemnly. The weight of that statement settled over the room like a lead blanket. First contact with an intelligent alien species, and it was happening because Beth had violated protocol to save a baby. Administrator, came Torres's voice again. They're requesting permission to approach. The transmission is, well, it's in English. Everyone stared at the cub, which suddenly looked very small and very young. We watch humans, it said quietly. We learn. We wait to see what humans do. And what we did, Beth said slowly, was steal their kid. Save their kid, the cub corrected firmly. Let's hope they see it that way, Walsh said grimly. Because if they don't, we're about to become the shortest-lived first contact in history. Outside, the lights were getting closer. The universe had apparently decided that Beth's day wasn't quite catastrophic enough yet. Through the reinforced windows of Kepler Station, she could see the approaching lights resolving into distinct figures, tall, graceful beings moving across the ice with the fluid efficiency of creatures born to this frozen wasteland. Each carried what were unmistakably weapons, though their design was unlike anything in human military doctrine. 12 confirmed contacts. Torres reported through the comm system, his voice tight with barely controlled tension. They've stopped approximately 200 meters from the main airlock and appear to be waiting. Waiting for what? Administrator Walsh demanded. The cub looked up at Beth with those large, intelligent eyes and said, in its musical voice, waiting for young one to come out. To see if humans return freely, or if humans keep as prisoner. Oh, fantastic, Beth muttered. A test. More than a test, the cub continued, its bioluminescent patches pulsing with what Beth was beginning to recognize as anxiety. If humans keep young one, family thinks humans are slave takers. If humans hurt young one, family thinks humans are killers. And if we return you safely? Walsh asked. Then family knows humans are, what is word? Honorable? Bruce was running tactical scenarios in his head. Beth could practically see the calculations spinning behind his eyes. 12 armed hostiles against a research station with minimal defensive capabilities. This isn't a fight we can win. It's not a fight we should have to win, Lillian interjected, her scanner still painting the air with holographic displays. This is a diplomatic situation. Diplomacy requires common ground, Walsh said grimly. Right now, all we have is a potentially kidnapped child. Rescued child, Beth corrected automatically. The station's external communication system crackled to life, and a voice like wind through crystal caves filled the room. The language was completely alien, but the tone needed no translation. It was the voice of a parent demanding answers. The cub responded immediately, its own voice rising in a complex harmony of clicks, whistles, and musical tones that seemed to convey far more information than human language could manage in the same time frame. The conversation continued for several minutes, with the cub's patches flashing in patterns that Beth suspected were part of the communication. Finally, the cub turned to the assembled humans and said, Family leader wants to speak to Beth Human. Me? Beth's voice cracked slightly. Why me? Because you are the one who saved, the cub explained patiently. Family leader must know your intentions? My intentions were to keep you from freezing to death, Beth said. Yes, but family leader must understand human reasons. Must know if humans save because humans are good, or because humans want something. Walsh stepped forward. I should handle this. I'm the ranking. No, the cub said firmly. Must be Beth Human. She is the one who chose to save. Others did not make choice. Kid's got a point, Beth sighed. This whole mess is my fault anyway. Beth, Bruce said quietly, you don't have to do this. We can find another way. What other way? Beth asked. Lock down the station and hope they go away? Somehow, I don't think that's going to improve interspecies relations. The cub moved to the window and made a series of vocalizations toward the waiting figures. One of them, taller than the rest, and carrying what looked like a staff topped with the same bioluminescent crystals that marked the cub's fur, stepped forward. Family leader, the cub said simply. Even at this distance, Beth could see the resemblance. The adult moved with the same fluid grace as the cub, and when it raised the crystal staff, patterns of light danced along its length in response to some unseen signal. They're beautiful, Lillian breathed. And she wasn't wrong. The beings were tall and elegant, their forms perfectly adapted to their environment. Their movements spoke of intelligence, purpose, and a deep connection to their frozen world that humans could barely comprehend. Beautiful and heavily armed, Bruce observed. All parents are dangerous when their children are threatened, Walsh said. The question is whether they'll see us as threats or allies. The cub looked up at Beth with an expression that somehow managed to convey both trust and apology. Beth, human, must go outside, must speak to family leader face to face. Outside? Beth's voice climbed several octaves. As in, outside, outside? Where the armed aliens are? Is only way, the cub said solemnly. Family leader will not enter human place. Too much risk. But if Beth Human comes outside, shows trust, then maybe family leader will listen. This is insane, Bruce said flatly. I can't authorize sending personnel into a potentially hostile situation. Then don't authorize it, Beth said, surprising herself with her calm tone. I'm volunteering. Beth? Look, if this goes wrong, it goes wrong whether I'm inside or outside, Beth said. But if there's a chance that walking out there can prevent a war, then that's what I'm going to do. The cub made a pleased chirping sound. Beth Human is brave. Family leader will respect brave. Let's hope so, Beth muttered, then looked at Walsh. Administrator, permission to attempt diplomatic contact? Walsh studied her for a long moment. This is your call, Lieutenant. But if you're doing this, you're going out there as an official representative of humanity? No pressure, Beth said weakly. Actually, the cub interjected, must also bring young one outside. Family leader must see that young one is unharmed and free to choose. Choose what? Beth asked. Choose to stay with humans, or return to family. The silence that followed was deafening. You mean, Lillian said slowly, this whole time you could have just left? Could have tried, the cub confirmed, but was warm here. And Beth Human was kind, and wanted to learn human words before going home. So you've been conducting your own little cultural exchange program? Walsh said, sounding like she couldn't decide whether to be impressed or terrified. Learning is good, the cub said simply. Understanding prevents fear. Fear causes fighting. Kid's smarter than most of our diplomatic corps, Beth observed. The external communication system crackled again, and the family leader's voice carried a note of impatience that transcended species barriers. Time to go, the cub said, moving toward the door. Beth took a deep breath, checked her thermal suit one more time, and tried to remember everything she'd ever learned about diplomacy. Which, come to think of it, wasn't much beyond don't shoot first and try not to insult anyone. If this goes badly, she told Bruce, Try to remember that my intentions were good." "Your intentions were always good," Bruce replied. "That's what scares me." The airlock cycled with mechanical precision, and Beth found herself standing on the surface of Valdris with an alien child and no clear idea how to prevent an interstellar incident. The cold hit her immediately, even through her thermal suit, and the wind carried sounds that definitely hadn't been in any human language database. The cub walked beside her with obvious excitement, its patches blazing with brilliant light. As they approached the waiting group, Beth could see details that the station's sensors had missed. The beings weren't just armed, they were decorated. Intricate patterns covered their natural armor, and each carried ceremonial items alongside their weapons. This wasn't a war party, it was a formal delegation. The family leader stepped forward as they approached, and Beth got her first close look at an adult member of what she was already thinking of as the Valdrian species. Up close, the resemblance to the cub was unmistakable, but where the cub was soft and rounded, the adult was all elegant angles and controlled power. Its eyes held the same intelligence as the cub's, but with depths that spoke of decades of experience. The cub immediately ran to the family leader and began an animated conversation in their musical language. The adult listened intently, occasionally making sounds that were clearly questions. Throughout the exchange, those ancient eyes never left Beth. Finally, the family leader approached her directly, stopping just outside arm's reach. When it spoke, the words were in accented but clear English. "You are the human who saved our young one." "I am," Beth said, hoping her voice sounded steadier than she felt. "My name is Beth. I am Kethmar, speaker for the Cold Wind clan. Our young one tells me you found them dying in the ice." "Yes. They were near our waste disposal unit, barely breathing. I couldn't just leave them there." Kethmar studied her for a long moment. "You could have. Your kind has rules about contact with other species. You broke these rules." "Yes," Beth admitted. "I did." "Why?" The question was simple, but Beth sensed that everything depended on her answer. She thought about protocol, about regulations, about all the reasons she should have left the cub where she found it. Then she looked at the young being standing beside its family leader, healthy and alive and glowing with bioluminescent joy. "Because they needed help," she said simply. "And helping someone who needs it is more important than following rules." Kethmar made a sound that might have been approval. The young one was undergoing the trial of survival, a test to prove readiness for adulthood. Beth's heart sank. "I interfered with your cultural practices. I'm sorry." "The trial was not meant to bring them so close to human territory," Kethmar continued. "That was unexpected. The young one would have died without intervention. So, I didn't actually ruin anything?" "You saved a life that would have been lost to poor planning," Kethmar said, and Beth could swear she heard amusement in that crystal voice. "The trial has evolved. Instead of proving survival skills, the young one has proven the ability to bridge two species. The cub, who apparently had a name that sounded like distant thunder, which Beth mentally filed under too complicated for human pronunciation, chirped happily and said something that made all the adult Valdrians make sounds that were definitely laughter. "What did they say?" Beth asked. "They said that humans are wonderfully illogical, but acceptably warm," Kethmar translated. "I'll take that as a compliment." It was meant as one. Kethmar stepped back and made a formal gesture that somehow conveyed respect, gratitude, and official recognition all at once. "The Cold Wind clan declares the human Beth to be a friend of the people. Your actions have shown us that humans possess the quality we value most." "Which is?" compassion that overrides self-interest. Kethmar looked toward the station, where Beth knew the others were watching through the windows. "We have observed your kind for many cycles, learning your ways, waiting to see if contact would be beneficial. Today, you have given us our answer." "So this is first contact?" Beth asked, feeling the weight of history settling on her shoulders. "This is first friendship," Kethmar corrected. "Much more important." The cub bounced excitedly between Beth and Kethmar, clearly pleased with how things were turning out. When it looked up at Beth, its expression was pure mischief. "Beth Human," it said in its musical voice, "want to learn real Valdrian words now?" "Sure, kid," Beth laughed, "but let's start with your actual name." "Name is Storm that laughs at wind," the cub said proudly. "Of course it is," Beth muttered. "Can I call you Storm?" "Storm is good human word," the cub, Storm, agreed. Kethmar made that sound of amusement again. "The young one has become quite attached to human customs. We may need to establish a cultural exchange program." "I think Administrator Walsh would love that," Beth said, then paused. "Actually, she'll probably have a complete nervous breakdown, but she'll love it eventually." "Your leader human seems very concerned with proper procedures," Kethmar observed. "She has to be. But under all that bureaucracy, she's good people." "Good people," Kethmar repeated, testing the phrase. "Yes, we will need to learn about good people." As they walked back toward the station together, the first human Valdrian diplomatic party in galactic history, Storm bounced alongside them, chattering excitedly in both languages about all the things they wanted to show their family. The other Valdrians followed at a respectful distance, their weapons now clearly ceremonial rather than threatening. "So," Beth said to Kethmar, "what happens now?" "Now," Kethmar replied, "we begin the delicate process of teaching two species to understand each other. It will be complicated." "Yeah," Beth agreed, watching Storm attempt to explain the concept of coffee to a group of beings who had never seen liquid water. "But I have a feeling it's going to be interesting." Behind them, Kepler Station's lights gleamed against the eternal ice, no longer a lonely human outpost, but the first embassy between two worlds. And somewhere in the administrative offices, Administrator Walsh was probably trying to figure out how to write a report that began with, "So, our security officer accidentally started an interstellar alliance." The universe, Beth reflected, had a twisted sense of humor. But sometimes, just sometimes, the joke turned out pretty well. Storm looked up at her with those brilliant, intelligent eyes and said, "Beth, human want to learn how to make light patterns?" "Absolutely," Beth said. "Teach me everything." And under the alien stars of Valdris, with the wind singing ancient songs across the ice, two species took their first steps toward understanding that the universe was a much warmer place when you had friends to share it with. Even if those friends happened to glow in the dark and think coffee makers were fascinating examples of primitive human technology.